My name's Ed Piscor.
I'm Jim Rugg.
And Jim, today we have Jim Valentino in the house. Shadowhawk, Guardians of the Galaxy. What If Volume 2? Very important to me, man. And one of the founders of Image.
Very special guest. Huge impact on my career, on my life, on my childhood. I remember buying Guardians of the Galaxy #1 when it was released off of the newsstand. So, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you. Nice to be here, virtually.
Big career, man. So you were a proper boy who was able to go get comics from the newsstand, from the spinner racks, when Marvel was pretty much just coming into effect. You know, Atlas is no longer. The King Kirby has been doing Fantastic Four and all that. Can you tell us what that was like?
Oh, it's great. These comics they weren't your dad's comics, to use that old phrase, you know. The balloons on the covers had these thick lines around them. Sometimes they were red, most of the time they were black. They didn't smell like DC comics. They just had a completely different feel. And it was like, this was our generation's comics, you know. Like the first Fantastic Four I remember buying was #5. And I didn't remember it because of Dr. Doom. I remembered it because the Thing was Blackbeard. And it was like, I thought that was so cool, you know, that's what I remembered.
It's
yeah.
it's so funny you say that, that those are like your comics, because when you guys start to do the sort of like revitalization of the Marvel properties in the early 90s, that's how we felt, where it's like I could get in on issue 1 of
Right.
Guardians of the Galaxy or Spider-Man or X-Force.
Absolutely. And it was that way with Image Comics, I think, with a lot of people. If you talk to Robert Kirkman, it was certainly that way for him because he was 10 or 11 or so. And it was like, these weren't the old comics. These were brand new. You could start at issue #1, and these were new characters, and there were almost no holds being barred, you know, at the time.
The word on the street was always that when DC was doing a distribution for Marvel, of course, why would they put, you know, those Marvel books in every corner store? And we had Warren Bernard from Small Press Expo. He sort of told us how hard Marvel books were to get your hands on in the 60s.
It's impossible. Actually, DC had a limit as to how many Marvel books they could publish. And that's why they did the split books like Tales of Suspense and Tales to Astonish and things like that, where you would have 2 characters in one book. And they also had to, the reason they had bi-monthly books was that they had to switch them. So one month, these books would come out, the next month, and other books. I think they were limited to 8 books, as I recall. That may not be accurate, but I think that's pretty close to it. So, yeah, DC was completely screwing them, you know, and stopping them from any kind of growth.
Distribution is something that we don't hear that much about, except people complaining about Diamond or something.
Yeah.
But there's such a rich history as to the way distribution affects this content. Like Marvel being limited at that time and how many books they could produce. Maybe that results in them having tighter continuity because it's a smaller group of books that they concentrate on. And then again, with the direct market,
Stan was either writing or editing all of them. So he had complete control over the line. I think one of the problems that has happened with a lot of nascent companies, brand new companies, is that they start off with a whole universe. That's not the way Marvel started off. You know, DC's always been a fiefdom, which I think is one of their weaknesses. So the Superman books are completely separate from the Batman books, unless they need to team up or they're in the Justice League or something like that, then they're okay. But if the villain beats the Atom, you know, he's got to beat the Atom, and if the Atom beats him, that's it. You know, he's over. But if he beats the Atom, he could take over the world. And it's like, as a kid, I was always like, what about Superman? You know, it's like, you know, are you nuts? And in Marvel, it beat up slowly. So like when we were kids, there were a couple of things. One of them was we had to ride our bikes all over town to find the latest Marvel books. And they were rare and precious. I mean, you talk about not your dad's comics. Finding one was a chore. and it was great. It was like, yeah, I got one. I got the latest Tales of Suspense or the latest Spider-Man or whatever. And at first, it was just like, you'd be reading a Spider-Man comic and Thor would go flying by. That never happened at DC. It was like, wow, that's so cool. So they built it slowly.
Were there other superhero comics coming out then in terms of like other publishers? I'm trying to think of some. I mean, Charlton obviously.
Tower had the Thunder Agents. Archie's had the Mighty Comics Group, which were just embarrassing. They were trying to do Marvel, but they had no idea what Marvel was doing. So it was sort of like, I don't know, like a 60-year-old guy trying to do hip hop, I guess. It just didn't work.
Would you fuck around with like Turok and Dr. Solar and shit like that? Or like Marvel was definitely the coolest?
Yeah, I didn't like any of those. I didn't like those. I didn't like humor comics, which is kind of strange. It never made me laugh. It wasn't until Underground Comics came that I liked humor comics.
It's like you're the perfect age. It's like you're right there when Marvel is hitting their groove, and then as you get older, the Undergrounds are hitting their groove.
Yeah, I was 20 in 72, so that would be just about when the Undergrounds were starting. So I'm as equally influenced by Robert Crumb as I am by Jack Kirby, by Von Bodie as I am by Steve Ditko. It's like they're both on the same level to me. And that could go on and on and on. I loved Spain, I loved S. Clay Wilson, I loved all those guys, Gilbert Shelton, all of them. But in the same token, I loved all of the old mainstream guys too.
Were you starting to draw comics at that age, at like age 20?
I started drawing comics when I was 2. I just didn't know how to. I didn't know what to do, But I started drawing when I was 2, and my dad was in World War II, and he always read comics in World War II. So he realized that I was drawing comics, basically. I was drawing off of the television. I was drawing on anything that stood still for a couple of minutes. And he brought me a shitload of comics. Now, I don't know which comics they were. I don't remember. But I do remember him walking into the house with an armful of them. And it was like a religious experience for me. It was like, now I get it. The world is okay.
How do you transition? Like, how do you start to figure that out? What's your path into comics, Jim?
Well, I didn't know. And for a long time there, I got lost. When I was coming up, when you were 18, 19 years old, you were put in the lottery to go to Vietnam and kill people or be killed. And during that period and after that period, I went through a kind of lost phase. And it was pretty difficult realizing that you were basically cannon fodder, and that was it. Your life was over at 18 or 19. So there wasn't really any reason to do anything. So what happened was I'd heard about San Diego, and my buddy and I just missed it by about a month or a couple of weeks or whatever it was. So we had determined that the following year we were going to go to San Diego. And I believe it was 1975, and that was my first convention. And I looked around and I saw people who were in the business, people who wanted to be in the business, people that were my age that were incredibly talented and moving in that direction. And I met a guy who became my mentor, Ken Kruger. I had the good fortune of sitting next to him. And I met Jack Kirby, which was really a thrill. And I realized that if I wanted to get into comics, I needed to, even though I didn't have the word at that time, I needed to network. And I realized that if I joined the San Diego Comic Committee, that I could meet people, I could learn how to do this, I could figure out the inroads, because there were people doing it there. It was the first time I ever saw a page of original art. I'd never seen a page of original art before. There were no books, there were no instructions, there was nothing like that. I was shocked that it was in black and white. That was like, and I was shocked that they were bigger than comic books, it was shocking to me. So I went back home. I was living in Mill Valley, which is in Northern California, just north of San Francisco. Anyways, so I put everything I owned into a backpack, stuck my thumb out, and moved to San Diego. I found this place. I knew this guy who was the manager of a theater, a movie theater. And it was one of those places that changed movies every other day, right? And everybody had their monthly calendar up on the refrigerators, in town. So I walked up to the guy and I said, Steve, I just blew into town. You wouldn't happen to have an opening, would you? And he goes, two people just quit on me, man. You're hired. And he goes, where are you staying? And I go, well, there's a field down the street here. I was figuring I'd just roll out my bag and sleep there for a while until I could get some money. And he goes, no, fuck that. Come and sleep on my couch. I'm in San Diego. A couple weeks later, I joined the convention committee. I don't remember exactly how I knew where it was, but I found out where it was. And it was a great time. There are these places that, for some reason or another, are magnets for talent, and that a lot of people are there. At that point in San Diego, it was Scott Shaw and Dave Stevens and John Pound and a whole bunch of other people that were just, like I said, on the verge of breaking in. So it was a great environment.
Who are some of the other guys that would have been on that committee? Would it be some of the names you just mentioned?
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't think any of them were on the committee yet. Scott was one of the people that helped. He was on the very first committee. So he helped. Ken Kruger did. Richard Alf. And it's funny, Shel Dorf took all the credit. Yeah. But Richard Alf, who was young at the time, put up all the money. And Kruger, who, as Mark Evanier described, was the only adult in the room, he put up the credit cards because the hotels didn't want to host the comic convention because they didn't think the bar tab would be strong enough. Oh, it's a bunch of kids, they're not going to go to the bar, we're not going to. Boy, if things changed.
It's that's such a formative time too. Like I always think, like friends that I've made in my life, it happens around that 18 to early 20s time frame. To be associated with cartoonists or comics at that age, it sounds magical.
I was about 24, so I was a little bit older. I was a little bit older. Like I said, I lost a few years there.
Just fast forwarding far ahead, what do you think was the tipping point at San Diego Comic-Con that sort of like made it this giant thing? Was it the like X-Men movie or something?
No, it was. It may have been a movie. I'm not real sure. I know that there was this convention in Oakland, WonderCon. And which is actually where I sold the Guardians of the Galaxy, and where I first had a real conversation with Frank Miller. It was a nice convention. I remember Faye Desmond, who I think she's the president or the CEO of Comic-Con, has been for a very long time. Lovely lady. She came up to me. I think I was the publisher of Image at the time, so it had to have been somewhere around 1999, 2000, somewhere in that vicinity. And she said, we want to open up the floor to movie studios and stuff. And I said, well, they've always been there. What would be the difference? And she said, well, a bigger presence. She goes, what do you think? And I said, well, I think they'll bring people into the the floor, and if people are there, I can sell them my books. If nobody shows up, I can't sell anything. But if people are there, I didn't realize what a dichotomy it would be. Because of this, there's two things. One of them is Jack Kirby's vision of Comic-Cons, and he was they talked to him very, very early on. He was the very first San Diego Comic-Con guest, okay? His vision was that it would encompass all forms of media. So science fiction, television, movies, etc., which eventually it did. In 1976, this guy showed up with these posters by Howard Chaykin, these big bloody posters, for a movie that was coming out the next year. And their thought was, if they could get the fans interested in this movie, it could have a decent opening, which is what they were looking for. And the movie was Star Wars. So it's like, this has not been, it's not a new thing. It's been going on since the very, very beginning. A lot of history here, guys.
This is awesome. This is so great. How do you, at this point, you start making your comics as, like publishing, like following these models that you're seeing professionals do at San Diego and at WonderCon? Is that the next step?
No, the next step was, at the time, fast printing started coming into vogue. So there were Xerox machines and stuff like that. So you had like Sir Speedy and places like that. Well, there was a guy in town named Joel Melke, brilliant cartoonist. And he was making these pamphlets. So was Rick Geary. Okay, they were both making these pamphlets that were basically homemade comics. Back in the day, we called them New Wave comics or mini comics. Now they call them small press. Same thing, right? Homemade comics, do what you want. That's how I learned what looks good in print and what doesn't, how to draw for print. And they were small, tiny print runs, and there was a whole network of people through Clay Garrity's and a few other people, Everyman Press in Colorado. And there was just a whole network of guys that were doing this. And most of it was a training ground, and some of it was just, guys who just wanted to express themselves and really didn't have any ambitions for a career. I did. I wanted a career.
Is Dave Sim the guy who gives you your first offset printed shot?
Almost. I think I was in a couple of underground comics before then, Cocaine Comics and Dope Comics.
And you mentioned those titles, and I think of John Pound and
Yes.
Scott Shaw would show up in those things too, man. So
Yes.
it's all checking out.
Yeah. John did a few wonderful covers. Beautiful. He was a great guy, great artist, really amazing. No, what happened was I had done this story for a Dennis Kitchen magazine called Bop. And Bop was about comics about music, popular music. So Kat Ironwood had gotten in touch with me, and she asked me to do a story. Well, the first thing I pitched at her was to do Procol Harum's A Salty Dog. And she sent back a note and said, "What is it with you guys and pirates?" And I was like, "I don't know, pirates, dinosaurs. Ask any boy. They love pirates and dinosaurs. I don't know why." Which I should have thought of doing a book about pirate dinosaurs, but it never occurred to me. But the thing is so I pitched her a second story, which was called In My Life, and it was about the assassination of John Lennon, which for my generation was an extremely big thing. It was probably second only to JFK, and maybe equal with that, because my generation lived through that one too. So JFK, RFK, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, John Lennon. We had it all. So I did this 4-page story, and then the book got canceled just as I finished it. So I had it printed in one of Clay's little books, and Clay showed it to Denny and Dave when they were doing a tour. And Clay said, send it to them. So Denny got my package the day she started looking through this book. She said she looked at both of them simultaneously, brought it into Dave, and Dave said, yeah, let's do it. So that was in Cerebus 50. It was published in Cerebus 50. A couple weeks later, Denny gave me a call and said, if you think about doing a series, think about doing one with us. Well, at the time, Cerebus was pretty big stuff, you know? So, you know, after I got up from fainting, I was like, okay, you know, what am I going to do? Then she told me that Dave was kind of trepidatious about it. I said, why? And she goes, well, your stuff is kind of salacious. And I was like, not really, but okay, you know. And he was afraid that I was going to get them in trouble. And I said, okay, I'll do something, you know, I'll do something innocuous. So a friend of mine from San Diego, an old friend, David Clark, David was doing a series with John Pound called Flip the Bird. It was a funny animal thing, which I thought was just the greatest title. Second greatest title I ever heard. The greatest title was The Adventures of God when he was a little kid. I thought that was the best title ever. So anyway, so David had this idea that he called Tales of the Innocent Bystander. And the notion was that it would be a bunch of vignettes about a guy who was always in the wrong place at the wrong time, right? So I called him up and I said, Dave, would you mind if I like borrowed that idea and just kind of fudged it some way or another? And he goes, yeah, sure, I'm not going to use it. Okay. I was living in a part of San Diego called Normal Heights at the time. And so I decided, okay, well, we want something innocuous. Why not a superhero parody? And I'll call it Normal Man. And it'll be the exact opposite of Superman. That's where it came from. So a few months later, Denny was coming to San Diego. Again, my whole career revolves around San Diego. And I can't remember if Dave was standing there or not, but I had shown Dave, I had done this spoof on Pacific Presents #2, a Rocketeer cover. And I showed it to Dave, and Dave burst out laughing. And Denny was like, okay, if Dave Stevens laughed at it, we're good to go. And she brought it up to Dave, and there you go. It became Art Anaheim's first color book. I think the only color book.
Were they publishing any other stuff outside of Cerebus at this point?
Yeah, they were publishing, excuse me, Neil the Horse and Journey by Bill Loebs. And I think they had just signed on Flaming Carrot, or just signed on Flaming Carrot shortly after me. So it's a pretty nice company to be in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that timing is interesting too. It seems like, you know, that's direct market is really taking off. Black and white comics, indie comics, creator-owned comics, you know, that's a big wave of those things. What was the reception like? You know, how does your life change when Normal Man starts to be published?
Well, you start getting invited to conventions, and you know, people come up to you and bring you stuff. I don't know. You know, it was a little more. It was nicer. It didn't set me up for life, you know, but it started to take off. So that was nice.
You continue, I assume, to network at that point. You know, as you're being a guest and invited to these other shows. Again, it seems like such a rich time for talent in comics history. Are you starting to, you know, form these bonds and find your tribe, the people that you would continue to go through your career with?
Yeah, Larry Martyr used to call it the class of '84. So I called them the usual suspects. It was Steve Bissett, Rick Veitch, Dave Sim, Batten Lash, Colleen Doran, James Owen, I'm sure, Don Simpson, who was my rival for a while, and then we became good friends. Yeah, it was, it was great. It was wonderful. They were great people. And it was funny because at the start of Image, those are the people I would hang out with. I never hung out with the other guys or anything like that. I would hang out with those people because they were, my friends. Bill Sienkiewicz was, in and out sometimes. So yeah, it was nice.
Normal Man versus Megaton Man.
Yeah.
Got several copies.
That is an incredible group of cartoonists. Are you guys talking about creator rights and things at that stage, like 84, 85?
Dave was, yeah. Yeah, Dave was. And of course everybody else was. I mean, most of us, Scott McCloud is in there as well. Most of these people were basically weaned on underground comics. So being around the same age as I was, they were into underground comics and when they were kids into superhero comics, right? Which explains a lot of the work that all those people produced. It was sort of in between the two. I think it was just part of the zeitgeist, if you will. It was just seemed like a natural way to go. For me, it was like obvious, of course, you would do your own stuff and you would own it, and there you go. But when I worked for Marvel, I also understood that it was work for hire, and part of my job was to create stuff for them, and that didn't bother me either. I think the thing that most people don't get is there's no problem with work for hire if you know what you're getting into. The problem is when they take advantage of kids that don't know what they're getting into. That's the problem. But if you know what you're getting into, then it's perfectly fine.
When you were constructing the Normal Man comics, like how deep did you get in the production process? Like, can you swing an Ames lettering guide? Can you cut your own color separations and make sure they don't moire on top of one another?
I did everything but staple them. No, I taught my wife how to use an Ames guide and how to letter because I hated lettering passionately, and she would always get pissed off because I put more words than there was space for, so yeah, that was great. And I have no color sense whatsoever, so she would color them for me, and then the separations were done by Murphy Anderson, who became good friends, who I became good friends with at that time. He had a separation house. Lovely man, lovely, and one of my heroes, and yeah.
Was that the same separation house that did all the other books, the Marvel books, the DC books? That's like the legend, It's like a little house in Connecticut full of old ladies who are cutting zipatones.
Yes, that is actually true. I don't know that they did all of them, but yeah, that's actually true. It was a little place in Connecticut with little old ladies cutting ruby lists, and that would be it. But I do remember taking the colored pages, and that I'm pretty sure Diane did, and numbering. So for white flesh tone, it would be R2, Y2, and you had to learn all that stuff in those days, Man, I'll tell you a story about that time, though. I got this letter from this guy who lived in Connecticut, and back when people actually wrote letters to each other. And it said that he and his art partner were getting a lot of criticism for their book, and that people were complaining that they couldn't tell the characters apart, blah, 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 and it was derivative and poorly drawn and yada, yada. And so he said, you've been around for a while. How do you deal with criticism? And I said, well, I separate people into two categories. Those who like my work are persons of rare insight and intelligence, and those who don't are Neanderthals. I said, and if you do that, you'll be fine. I said, but don't listen to either one of them. Don't take any of it seriously. Fuck it. Just do what you want to do. Your book is doing fine and blah, blah, blah. Well, his name was Peter Laird. And I sent him a note after the Turtles took off, and I said, Peter, you win.
That advice was he put it to good use.
He did.
It was such a rich period of time. Like you put his name in the hat, and then the circles all connect because
Right.
with the privilege that they were afforded with that Turtle series, they're calling out all sorts of stuff. And I saw Normal Man as a call out in the back of random Turtles comics back in the day.
Yeah.
Jim, this is a little aside. I don't know if you'll have much to add to this, but were you reading like Raw magazine in the 80s? Were you looking at that stuff?
I still have it. I still have all of them.
What was your reaction to that? Because I'm always interested. I come at all this stuff later, like when it's like, oh, this is important, go track this down. But I'm always curious, like, what was it like when you picked up a Raw magazine for the first time?
It was interesting. Okay, it was interesting. There were some artists that I really didn't care much for. I've never been a big fan of primitive art. So there were some guys that I didn't care much for, but it had Art Spiegelman in it, whom I just thought was just great, just brilliant. And that was, I think, the very first place that Mouse appeared.
Issue number 2.
I recalled. But yeah, I mean, they had the tipped in mini books and, just everything about it, die cut covers, and there was a lot of interesting stuff. So I looked more at it more as artistically than as a fan necessarily. I was dissecting it artistically.
Was your local comic shop called the Land of Ooze and Oz?
Yeah, one of them. Yeah.
My fair publisher at Fantagraphics, Eric Reynolds, was a cashier working at that shop, and he said that like you would come in every now and then, and at one point, must have been in the early 90s or late 80s or something, where he said, like, Valentino came in, was talking with the guys, and said, I'm gonna revitalize Guardians of the Galaxy. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do that. Basically, you said this stuff 2 years before all of these things that you said happened.
Yeah, I think his memory is a little fuzzy, but Eric and I have had disagreements about several things. But I may have said something about it, but it wouldn't be like me to. I mean, Guardians of the Galaxy was an afterthought.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The convention in Oakland was coming up, and Rob and I were going to go up together. Okay.
How'd you meet Rob? Let's go there first.
Okay. We had a mutual friend named Brian Murray. I'm not exactly sure how I met Brian Murray, but I went over to Brian's. Brian said, "Come over to the studio tonight. I want you to meet this kid." And I was like, "Okay." Now, I don't know if I assume you guys talked to Rob in one of these things, and you know how excitable he is. Well, imagine him at 19. And, my description of Rob was that he was a speed freak that stuck his finger in a light socket until he got excited. And then it was even worse. So I was rather enthralled with Rob. I mean, he was very much younger than me. So it was kind of like he introduced me to a lot of the new stuff that was going on at the time, which I had no familiarity with. I introduced him to a lot of the old stuff and explained why Jack Kirby was brilliant, why Steve Ditko was an amazing artist, and all this kind of stuff. I remember one time when we shared a studio, he was looking at this bookcase I had in the studio, and he pulled out carload of comics, and he said, "You always talk about how brilliant this guy is." And I go, "Listen, read it." So he sat down on the floor and read it, and just was in tears. He was laughing so much. And when he got done with it, he threw it across the room and said, "That guy's going to burn in hell. I never want to read him again."
I was just thinking about like little pastor son.
That's amazing.
Rob Liefeld getting a jolt of R. Crumb, carload of comics.
So anyway, so that's how I met Rob. We got along famously almost from the beginning, despite the age difference. I think it's something like 15 years or something like that.
So you're shifting then from, like Normal Man and indie comics to Marvel. Is that what's behind that shift? Is it the black and white implosion, or?
Yeah, no, I made no bones about the fact that I wanted a career in comics. I wanted to be able to support my family and support myself. And that's still today. That's pretty much, I had no interest in being a superstar. I have no interest in being a millionaire. I mean, it would be nice, but that's not why I do what I do. I do what I do because I love comics. And I always have. So that's all I really wanted. And at every single juncture, at every single turn, I got called a sellout. It was wonderful. And I was like, who am I selling out? It's like, this is what I want to do. So yeah, it was difficult. It was a transition. It took me about a year or a little bit longer to do that. I did covers for Malibu. Did a lot of covers for them as I was transitioning, did a few other things as I was transitioning, trying to transition. According to my detractors, I never did, so it's okay.
Tell us about that trip to a WonderCon with Rob, though.
Okay, so we're going to WonderCon. Rob is, I believe, still working on Hawk and Dove. Okay. He wanted to talk to Marvel, and Marvel is like making overtures, I think at that time, he can correct me, to move into the X office. I mean, they realized that Rob had something. And they wanted to tap into it. So they were looking to prop up the X office. I had done several pitches. One of them was with Rob that I was going to write, he was going to draw, called Young Avengers. And our idea was basically to do the Teen Titans at Marvel. That was the idea, not a very original idea or anything like that. And there were several other things that I had. So I wasn't satisfied really with any of them. The Young Avengers I figured was a shoo-in, but just in case, I wanted something else in my back pocket. So I'm looking through the Marvel Universe Handbook, which, had come out at that time. And I called up Rob and I go, what do you think of the Guardians of the Galaxy? And he goes, they look cool, they just don't have a story. Yeah, okay, all right. And I just sort of set it aside. And about 2 nights later, I think it was like the day before we left for the show, or 2 days before, I'm heading to the bathroom at midnight and it hits me. What if they go on a quest for Captain America's shield? And that, everything just sort of flowed from that. The second that came down, I wrote it down. And that was it. Everything flowed from that. Why not explore what the Marvel Universe is like in the 31st century? That was the idea. Well, when we got to the show, they liked the Young Avengers, but they turned it down because Tom DeFalco had just written a story in Thor that hadn't come out yet that debuted the New Warriors. And he was like, how did you know? And I said, I didn't know, but, it just seemed obvious to do this, So that one got nixed. Then he read The Guardians, I think when he went back home. They were both Mark and Mark Greenwald and Tom DeFalco were both very nice, very generous. They treated us really, really, really incredibly nicely. So when he went back home, and then Tom gave me a call and said that he had a story in mind for the Guardians where they would be 500 years from where they were when last we saw them, 500 years in the future, so to be a whole new team. And they would be actually galactic Guardians. They would cover the galaxy. And I said, so sort of like the Legion of Superheroes, if they were the Green Lantern Corps. And he goes, yeah, kind of. And he said, but I like your idea better. And I said, okay, I'll tell you what, you greenlight my idea and I'll set your idea up. And he goes, done. That was it.
Was the second volume of What If a Jim Valentino vehicle as well, because all the issues that I could remember picking up were definitely Valentino written comics.
I'm sorry.
Oh, I love that stuff, man. I should pull out my dog-eared copy of What If Peter Parker and Mary Jane split up or never got married.
I have a story on that one. What if, again, I was trying to get a gig at Marvel. Obviously, the common wisdom of the day said that you should start at the bottom and work your way up. I said, fuck that. I'm going to start at the top and work my way down. So I wanted a job at Marvel. It's, that's the best place to go. Still is, it's still a great place to go. So What If was a title without a established creative team. Every issue was different. It was a standalone one. So I figured, well, I could do this. So I think the first one I wrote, I think Craig Anderson, who was also a San Diego guy, asked me to write it. It was about Captain America not dying or something. I can't remember. Anyways, I wrote that one. And then I pitched the Avengers, the Vision one. So I just took out, all the comics and all the George Olszewski, another San Diego guy, all of his indexes. And I just made notes to myself all over it, wrote down the story, and there it was. It was easy for me to do. So that's why the Guardians wound up in Craig's office, because he and I had a relationship in San Diego, and because it was kind of an ongoing what if. At least that's the way I looked at it.
I remember those Guardians would always stand out because I was buying off a spinner rack, at a magazine store, and those were always the best covers. Because it would always have some element like a Captain America shield or the Ghost Rider of the 31st century or, adamantium skeleton, for Wolverine or something. It was always...
No, that was me.
Oh, man. It was such a compelling, though, like the concept was so compelling because it did tie in. You wanted to see, what is this character? What's the version of this character in the future? And, it was like the story covers, which were kind of phasing out at that point. It seems like that's when a lot of pinup covers were starting to pop up. And so seeing those ones that are like, I need to know the answer to, I need to know what happens in this book. I always remember the Guardians for that. They really had great covers for that reason.
Yeah, those were the old DC covers where they would do this tease cover and you'd go, well, that's just ridiculous. How are they going to get out of that one? And you'd have to buy the book to find out how. And they always, it was always cheesy. It was always kind of shitty. But nonetheless, the thing about the Guardians covers, at least when I was on it, was we did the first 4, I think, before I finished the first issue. And we didn't have an inker for the issue. So it was split up between different inkers. So Scott Williams inked one and Mike Zapp inked one. That was pretty cool. And so we decided to continue that. So I called up George Perez and said, hey, would you ink a cover of the Guardians? And he goes, I haven't worked for Marvel in years. I go, come on, man. He goes, it's just a cover. And he goes, oh, okay. So I told my editor, I said, I got George Perez to ink cover for issue number 7. He goes, no shit.
We are the products of Image Comics when we were kids growing up and everything. Can you tell us about that What If issue that you did with Rob?
Oh,
Wolverine becomes an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D.
Oh, sure. Craig was coming out to visit my studio. And Rob and I were in separate studios at the time, but it was sort of silly. It was like, if he wasn't in my studio, I was in his studio, and that was just the way it was in those days. So I told Rob that Craig was coming and that he should meet him. And Rob goes, I got a great idea for a what if. I go, what? He goes, what if Wolverine was an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D.? I said, dude, you've got to tell that to Craig. So Craig comes in, we're talking, shooting shit, yada, yada. And I said, Rob's got an idea for what if. Just put him on the spot, And tell him, Rob. And Rob goes, what if Wolverine was an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D.? And Craig's eyes became saucers. And he was like, do it. And Rob was like, Jim's going to write it. He goes, do it. Just do it. It was the biggest selling issue, I think, of What If ever. It was just monstrously huge.
I think about 5 copies have come through my collection just because, like as a kid, I would just fucking read it to death, to tatters.
Huh?
It's a fun comic, and you're credited with breakdowns on there. And I'm curious how detailed the breakdowns might have been, because to my taste, like that issue has some of the best like Rob Liefeld like storytelling in all of his like early comics, and specifically it's like when Baron Strucker kind of hijacks the floaty Corvette or whatever, the Nick
Ferrari
Fury's car, the Ferrari. Like that's an amazing. It's like 3 pages of beautiful like action movie fucking comic book storytelling.
The funny thing was I was trying to do it in Rob's style, or as close to Rob's style as I could make it, but maintaining storytelling.
So you would do fairly detailed breakdowns?
Yeah, they were very detailed. Yeah, I think they may have been on 8.5 by 11-inch pages. I think Rob may know, but yeah, they were detailed. The funny thing was years later, when Heroes Were Born happened, I wrote and actually laid out the very first issue of Avengers #1, the Avengers #1 that came out, but I laid it out for George Perez. Mm-hmm. And wrote it for George Perez, specifically for him. And I did my best to lay it out in his style. And not that George needs anyone to lay out anything for him. He's a great storyteller, and it was a very big influence on me personally. Which is funny, because what we discovered when we became friends was that we lived in New York 2 blocks away from one another. And I think he's like 2 years younger than me. So we would have gone to the same PS, and we would have found out that there was another guy who was into comics and drawing, and we probably would have become really good friends as kids, except I moved away. So one of those things.
What else do you remember about that time period, Jim? Because, like, you know, as Ed said, that's really when I got into comics, was that early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. And I mean, it's such a boom time from the outside. You know, every year it seemed like there was a new record set for books sold. Obviously, 92, you know, you guys go off to do Image. What was the atmosphere like? I mean, you go to Marvel and it's like, you know, amazing. It's like a boom town. What did that feel like from your perspective?
It was great. I mean, it wasn't so much the sales necessarily, although the sales were really good. I mean, Guardians was a very mid-list book, and we had a positive sales slope, which means that every single issue got better and better. Even though it was a mid-list book, it was selling in the neighborhood of 250,000 copies at the time.
It's amazing.
Which today people would die for, right? But then you had to offset it against Jim's book and Rob's book and Todd's book, you know, which were selling millions of copies, you know. So it was really nice. I think the nicest thing about it, there were several really nice things about it. First off, you were with a company that was #1. You know, there was just no denying it. You were on the winning team. Second, at conventions, Mark Greenwald was this great, he would make the convention panels fun. So sometimes you do a panel and you were on the Hollywood Squares, and it was hilarious fun, you know, and different things like that, game shows, stuff like that. I remember I can't remember why or how, but I remember Greg Wright, who had hair down to the middle of his back, skipping across a room because somebody demanded that he do it. So it was this time when everybody was having a lot of fun and producing really good books, but having an awful lot of fun. It was great. It was great to be a part of it. I mean, you really felt like you were part of something.
It's awesome to hear you talk about or mention Mark Grunwald. One of my favorite things about talking to everybody is hearing stories about these guys that I never got to meet, but I've only heard good things about Mark Grunwald. And any personal stories with him? I mean,
He, when I first got the Guardians, he called me up and said, I want you to write out where every single Marvel character is in the 31st century. And I thought he was busting my chops. You know, it's like, fuck you. But I did it, and it turned out that it was very, very beneficial because it showed me who I could use, who I couldn't use, and made me think about where they were or where they weren't, you know? So one of the first things I realized was there was no Spider-Man. Why? Because it's 1,000 years in the future. Spider-Man would be like Robin Hood. He'd be more of a legend than an actual thing. And Robin Hood's 1,000 years in the past. So that was my first goalpost. Okay, no Spider-Man. But characters like Thor and Galactus and Silver Surfer, and yeah, they're still around. They're immortal.
Should we start taking things toward the image direction?
So wait a minute about Mark Greenwald. Let me tell you about Mark, because after Image had formed and everything, Marvel had these baseball shirts made up with Marvel written across them, right? So I go up to Mark and I go, Mark, slide me one of those. And he goes, man, if I get caught sliding you one of these, I'm going to get into trouble. I go, oh, come on, don't be a pussy. So he slid it to me. And I wore it the next day with image pins all over it. He was a really good guy, you know, and it always pissed me off that John Byrne said that Image killed Mark Greenwald. That just was always just a shitty thing for him to say. But then again, it's John Byrne.
We were doing our little Wizard magazine dissections, and we made note, like, early on, there was at least a small window of time where you were the one guy who was allowed to kind of continue doing Guardians while doing the Shadowhawk. I don't know if that was conceptual at that stage in that interview where you thought shit was all good at Marvel. How did that work out?
They fired me. The editor told me that he thought the colorist was more important to the book than I was. And I was like, okay. I had said, because of the workload and because of everything that was going on, I would like to write the book and let someone else draw it, because I was telling a very large overarching story that would have culminated in issue 50. Funny thing is, when I talked to Keith Giffen many years later, I found out that he was writing a very similar story in Legion of Superheroes, and neither one of us knew it. But his story was about a Promethean child. My story was about a character called the Protege, which was based on my then 7-year-old son, Aaron. And the Protege, his ability was the power to learn any ability that he saw. So it didn't matter what it was, he could do it. The second he saw it, he could do it. So Eternity and the Living Tribunal were both keeping their eyes on this kid. But since their time span was marked by centuries and eons, they didn't realize that this kid would grow up quickly, you know, to their time frame. So the idea was that this kid was basically a warlock child. He would create his own cocoon. In issue 50, he was going to kill Galactus and consume his energy. And that would cause him to go into a cocoon state where they would pull him out of eternity. And he would grow up in an environment where there was just nothing, just him growing up conscious in this environment. The reveal was that when he grew up, he would become the Beyonder. And that was the story that I was shooting for. And I wanted to finish it. Oh, well. Such is life.
Can you tell us about the formation of Image from your perspective?
Oh, yeah. Rob had been... It was Rob had decided he was going to do a book with Malibu called The Exterminators. And it was advertised in Comics Buyer's Guide, which was the comics rag at the time. He got an early morning phone call from Bob Harris yelling at him that he couldn't play off of the X name and that he'd never work in this town again and blah, 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 blah. And I think it was meant to scare Rob. It did not. It just pissed him off. So Rob started talking to the three people that he felt the closest to. Todd McFarlane, whom he kind of saw as his new mentor. Me, his semi off and on again studio mate, and Eric Larson, who he thought was a goofball, but was a good goofball. And he started talking about doing independent books away from Marvel. So flash forward a few months and we're in San Diego, and there was this big, huge dinner party that split in two. Half of the party went with Fabian Nasieza somewhere, and our party went with Dave Olbrich to a Mexican restaurant. So Rob is sitting next to me. I think Eric is sitting next to Dave. And Rob goes to Dave. He said, "Would you publish a book by me?" And Dave started laughing and goes, "Yeah, of course." He goes, "How about me and Eric?" "Yeah." He goes, "How about me, Eric, and Jim?" "Yeah, fuck yeah, anything you guys want to do." And he's laughing. And I'm looking at Rob thinking, he's not kidding, Dave. He's serious, So then Rob starts talking to the four of us. Eric signs on immediately. I'm not on a million-seller book, and I've got 5 kids, So I'm like, I'm a little bit trepidatious about this. And he's talking to Todd. Todd at the time was retired. Todd was trying to make hockey cards, okay, trading cards of hockey people, because, he's Canadian, and I think it's a law that you have to like hockey. Anyways, finally, in December, they're going to New York for the Sotheby's auction. It was the very first comic book auction at Sotheby's. Now, I'd been talking to 2 friends of mine. I've been and kind of filling them in on what was going on as things were progressing. One of them was Larry Martyr, and the other one was Eric Stevenson. So I remember, I get this call from Todd before they left. "Yeah, it's just the world famous Jimmy Valentino." I'm like, "Yeah, what's up, Todd?" And he's like, "Okay," he says, "we're going to go to New York and we're going to tell Marvel that we quit. We're going to form our own company." He goes, "I got Eric Larson in one back pocket." He says, "Do I got Jimmy Valentino in the other?" I was like, "Fuck." I said, "Todd, are you really going to do this?" And he's like, "Yeah." I said, "No bullshit. You're in." He goes, "Yeah." I'm in. So then I have to go home to my wife. And I said, I either made the biggest mistake of my life or the best decision I've ever made. And she's like, "Oh, fuck, what?" Because by this time she's used to it, So I told her, and she was like, "No, this is going to work. This is a good idea." So they go to New York, and all that's been written about. And you can actually read about it in Splitting Image, because we fed all of that to Don Simpson, which is a whole nother story. I got a million of them. Anyways, so they go there. I get this call from Rob. "We ran into Mark Silvestri in the lobby and told him about it. He's in." That's awesome. Then the next day I get this phone call from Rob. "We just talked to Jim Lee. We think he's in." So I call up Larry and I go, you remember that avalanche we've been talking about all summer? And he goes, yeah. And I said, I think it just became an atomic bomb. And he goes, why? What did they do? And I said, they just signed on Jim Lee. And there was like dead silence. And he, and he goes, you guys are going to do so much damage. I was like, yeah, man, I love that. Like, let's do as much as we can get away with. So
all these names you mentioned, I mean, very famously, all Marvel names,
Yeah.
Marvel talents. The thing that was always kind of sort of unclear, but it just seems like you'll tell me the meeting that you guys then have with DC Comics, like.
Well, I wasn't there. I heard
okay.
about
Okay.
it. Todd told me about it.
Right.
He said they walked in after the meeting with Marvel with Terry Stewart, which I think Jim Lee almost got sick at. And I think Rob left early because his girlfriend demanded that they go somewhere. So Todd said that he brought Jim Lee in, and DC's like, oh man, he's bringing Jim Lee to us. And Todd was like, yeah, we're not going to work for you guys either. And they told them about their new creator-owned, or their new favorable creator things contract. And Todd's response, which was the correct response, was, did you talk to any creators about them? Well, no. And Todd was like, oh, fuck you. So, yeah. There you go. I was in Southern California at the time. Eric was in Northern California at the time, and they were in New York. So
that's always the one piece where it's like, why did that happen again?
Yeah.
Yeah. Todd being Todd,
Right.
He just, I think what he told me was that he just felt they should know, that he was giving them a heads up. To which I was like, why? None of us worked at DC. Who cares? But I don't know. I think he did it just to swing his dick around, honestly.
That's what I was thinking. Different metaphors,
Yeah.
50-pound nutsack,
Yeah.
whatever you want.
Would love to hear the DC office guys version of this story. Like they're sitting there on a Tuesday, business as usual.
Yeah. Yeah.
The guy who sold 2.5 million, the guy who sold 8.5 million in our offices. The best we can do is break Batman's back.
Yeah. Well, and kill Superman.
And kill Superman, of course.
Yeah. Which they claimed wasn't a response to Image.
Malibu version of Image.
Yeah, I mean, what's the next step? It's amazing that all of you get together and can agree on something. A bunch of artists in a room. What follows the walkout from Marvel?
Well, the first thing is that the guys at Marvel, particularly Terry Stewart, who was the publisher or whatever at the time, said, "You guys will never make it." Okay. And I have to say, after almost 30 years of doing Image, I understand why they said that most artists are not very good at business or anything like that. We were, all of us were. And that was kind of weird, that there were this group of guys who actually could pull it off, right? It wasn't that we all agreed on everything. That's not true. Although Mark Silvestri believes that every single meeting was yelling and screaming at each other. That's his memory of it, which is completely wrong. Okay, I love Mark, but we laughed a lot. Usually at all the guys who were making fun of us, and saying all these things. Yeah, we'll show them, because the basic, the thing in the industry was that we wouldn't last 6 months, For the 10th anniversary in previews, I set up a photograph. I don't have it. I don't have that issue of previews, and I wish I did. I wish I still had the photograph. But it was Todd kneeling, Mark standing, Eric kneeling, and me kneeling. So if you put it together, it's
That's so dope. And by the way, do you know what was on the cover of that issue of previews? Because we have a PO box and we have very cool fans, and if they send it to us, we'll send it your way.
I don't know what issue it was. I really don't. I know it was the 10th anniversary, so that would be 9202, February 2002.
Okay.
That's what it would be. So they said we couldn't do it. So when we had our very first meeting, which was February 1st, 1992, and there was no announcement or anything yet. There was a lot of rumors about it. No announcement. We decided two things. And it wasn't that we were so, that we knew what the future held or anything like that. It was mostly, I think it was mostly Todd to try and protect himself from everybody else because, Todd believed that we were all on his coattails anyways. And he still does. The two rules that we had was no partner could interfere with another partner's business. We knew that we were all going to be separate entities and that Image was this umbrella, okay? So we knew the easiest way to keep peace was not to interfere with one another. You want to start a toy company? Fine. You want to sell your stuff to DC? Okay. Whatever you want to do, you can do. And that was part of it. It's the strength of Image and it's the weakness of Image. Okay. The second rule was that Image Comics Incorporated would never own anything except the Image Eye. And we've stuck to that all these years.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Is it a thing, like when you form this, and we don't have to get into specifics or anything like that, but like everybody puts in X amount of dollars into a hat and that's the coffers that the books are printed from, or you pay for your own books, or? No,
everybody put in money to start up the company. But we made a contract for 1 year with Malibu. Malibu had the infrastructure that we didn't have. We figured it would take 1 year for us to get that infrastructure, right? But we made all the deals. We realized that 7 of us together in this umbrella company could make deals with printers and distributors and, paper people and all this stuff that goes with it, because it was one unit, right? Much stronger than any one of us individually. That was smart. I mean, that was thinking ahead. So we made a deal with Malibu to be basically the office for us for 1 year. During that 1 year time, they would get 10% off of every book that was published. It's a huge windfall for them, just gigantic. And of course, immediately they they created Buvara and the Ultraverse and all these other things to be in competition with us.
It's really fun, like when you go through those young bloods, and then like the back cover ad is like the Protectors. It's like that ain't quite there, man.
Well, they did, and God bless them, whatever.
And let's say, by the way, the amazing deal, because usually it's the flip. Like you would get the 10% of my hip hop book or something. Like I would be the one to get the 10%, not the publisher. So that's like an amazing.
Well, that's what we did too for everybody that came on. One of the things that we decided was that non-partners would not get quite the same deal that we had, but they would own their own properties. They would, I forget what the split was at the beginning. I think it may have been 20/70, something like that. But they would get the lion's share of the money. We decided that we would not penalize anyone for success, but it was a gamble. You had to believe in yourself. You had to believe in your book. If your book tanked, it tanked. But if your book was a success, you could become a millionaire. Robert Kirkman is the best proof in the world of that, right? He did 5 or 6 other series for me before Walking Dead, right? So you got to hit it, and you got to hit the right thing, and nobody can say what the right thing is, because if there's one thing that I've seen over the course of 7,000 years, it's that the next big thing is always completely different from the last big thing. And that's just a truism. Every once wants to jump on the bandwagon of the current big thing. No. History shows us you got to come up with something completely different.
Jim, when we were going through, as Ed said, we've been going through these wizards, and sort of seeing like the timeline of the first several years of Image. Early on, something that stood out to me, of course, Marvel's executives and editors aren't going to be happy with you, but there was a lot of backlash from other creators. And it really, it was shocking to me to revisit that. Did you guys have a sense of that at the time, and how must you have felt from that?
We laughed. Literally, we made fun of them. It's like, yeah, okay, we'll show you. It came to, I think, a fulcrum very early, almost immediately, in San Diego again in 1992. Okay, we had appeared at the Chicago Comic-Con, right? So now San Diego, a month later or something like that. So we decided, in Chicago, we let it be known that Dale Keown was joining us, doing a book called The Pit.
Boy, did that excite me.
Yeah, he's an incredible artist, still is. We were all like, wow, cool, Dale Keown, that's awesome. So in San Diego, we had lined up all the people that we'd been talking to. So and we brought them on stage, gave them an Image cap, brought them on stage. So it was like Mike Grell and Jerry Ordway and, just all these guys, Sam Keith, all these guys coming on stage, one after the next, after the next, after the next. So, and the audience was like, holy shit, these guys are real. This is real. This is serious. These are not, these are not fly-by-night new guys. These are established pros that are really good, So I had the very last announcement. Todd said, hey, Jimmy's got an announcement for us. He goes, who are you bringing in? So I brought up Rick Veitch and Steve Bissette. And I said, they're doing a new book that'll be written by Alan Moore. And the whole place went, you could just see it. And it just was like a wave in the room. It was so weird. And they couldn't fight it. So there were guys, I don't want to name anybody, but there were a lot of them. John Byrne, Peter David, who has since become a friend. A bunch of guys that said we shouldn't have left Marvel to form our own company, and how dare we, and blah, 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 and we were never going to live up to our ideals. And it's all these years later, and we did, and we have stayed around for nearly 30 years now.
It's amazing. Where did the Shadowhawk concept come from? Was that something you played around with here and there? Was it going to be maybe a character introduced in Guardians of the Galaxy?
Sort of. It started, there was a guy named Scott Fulop who was working at Archie at the time, and he was trying to get together a dark version of the Archie characters. So he had Kelly Jones and I think Len Wein do The Hangman. None of these books ever came out. And then there was another book, and he was calling up the studio a lot, trying to get Rob to do The Patriot or The Shield. So I would talk to him every now and then and said, I got an idea for the Fox. And it was basically what I did with Shadowhawk later on. So he said, okay, send me a pitch and let me see it. So I wrote up the pitch and blah, blah, blah. And then, of course, my luck being what it was, the company folded. The guys at Archie, saw what he was doing and they're like, yeah, no, we're not going to do that. We're Archie. And so I set it aside for a while. There was a story arc in the Guardians where Shadowhawk absorbed Alita. He drew her into his body, and she was gone. And the thing was, I hated Shadowhawk. He was the most popular character in the book, and I just hated him. I thought he was a dick. It's like always doing the one, take the word of one who knows, and then he'd split. As soon as things got shitty, he'd take off, and everybody else would have to deal with it. So I brought him back as a dark character because I wanted to turn him into a villain. So my idea was to change his name to Shadowhawk. And it was one of 2 times that Marvel said no to me. And Tom called me up and said, I don't want you to do that with Starhawk. We need to keep his name Starhawk. It's a good name. He goes, but why don't you take the Shadowhawk and create a new character for it? Oh, okay, all right, I could do that. So I pulled out the old Fox thing and put Shadowhawk on it. And then I talked to Mark Texera, who had just done an issue of Guardians. He'd just penciled or inked or drawn an issue of Guardians. And the reason he did that was because I needed a break because I had just done 2 double issues in a row. So I needed a break. And because he had told me that no one would hire him to do a superhero book. And I thought, God, that is just crazy. He's such a great artist. He's got, that issue was really, really popular. We got a ton of mail over it. So I figured, okay, well, I'll give this to Mark. And this is right up his alley, a dark superhero, And then Image happened. So there you go. But when Image was first formed, I had about 4 different ideas. Wasn't sure which one to go with.
Yeah, like that was some stuff that would have been teased in that Wizard number 10 was the one where the announcement was made, and the Pact was brought up, a couple other pieces that eventually saw the light of day, as Shadowline formed and everything.
I don't know if we're jumping ahead too much, but like the next big thing in my memory is kind of the collapse of the industry in the mid 90s. What was your perspective on that?
Oh, I was suicidal. It was awful, No, I'm kidding. It was tough, and we had expected things to go on, but there was a speculator bubble, and everybody knew that bubble had to burst. Everybody knew it. I think, and I may be wrong with the timing and everything, but I think Superman, the death of Superman, it was kind of the final blow. If it wasn't the final blow, it was crippling blow, So here were all these people who had boxes and boxes of the same comic that they thought was going to, get their kids through college. Well, no, probably not, but okay. And then we got blamed for that, of course, which, what I said was, that's like going into a Chinese restaurant, ordering everything on the menu, and then yelling at the kitchen because you couldn't finish it. It's like, it's not our fault, guys. We're making comics. You guys order them. We expect you to act like responsible adults. And if you can't do that, don't blame us. So it was bound to happen, We tightened our belts and figured out how to move forward.
What were some of the changes that you had to do as a sort of pivot from the peak years of Image and then as Shadowline develops and all of that? You have, like, first off, did you have a big staff? Like, I know you didn't run a studio, but I know that people have worked for you in administrative capacities and things.
Yeah, no, I had an office, not a studio. I only had a few people working for me, and we did okay. We had enough to weather the storm. I had done pretty much I called it the non-line because it was non-affiliated, but it was pretty much black and white alternative comics. And Rob used to call me the non-image guy. It's like I moved completely away from what they were doing because that's where my interests lie. Give me a good story. That's always been my thing. Give me a good story. Tell me a story that, give me a pitch that I want to know I want to know that story. and that's it. And I don't care about genres or anything. I still don't, you know. It's like, tell me a good story. I think the best pitch I ever got was, it's 15th century feudal Japan in the Vikings land. I want to read that story. That's a cool story.
Yeah, man, that's super visual.
Yeah.
In terms of merchandise, there were some Shadowhawk things here and there, but I think the Shadowhawk skateboard, was that insanely popular? Because that was in like the little department stores and stuff that we have here in Pittsburgh, and I saw like a lot of kids running around town with that thing.
I never got any royalties from it.
Wow.
That's wild to hear, because those things were heavily in stock. Hill's department store represent.
It could have been, it could have been regional. I don't know. Yeah, I remember. As a matter of fact, I just gave the last deck that I had to one of my grandsons. So, because he collects decks, so I was like, "Hey, I found this in the garage." He's like, "Oh, cool," So.
And he knows the lore, man. He knows the added bonus that this motherfucker breaks spines.
Yeah, well,
Not a good slogan for a skateboard.
Right.
well, his mom took my daughter took him and his younger brother to San Diego last year, and they got to meet Robert and Todd and Rob. And they were just in seventh heaven. You know, it's like all these cool guys, that do these cool things. And there's a back issue did a thing on the Guardians of the Galaxy where they interviewed Aaron, and because Aaron created Taserface when he was 5, right? And he was also the model of the protege. And he had this quote that I really loved. He said, "Using your imagination was encouraged in our house." And that was true. And he said, all of my dad's friends were in multimedia. They did all these things, so he grew up with it all, and, wasn't unusual to them. There's a wonderful picture of my youngest sitting on Rob's lap when he's about 5, and Todd's next to him, and Todd's putting his thumb down on some ridiculous Wizard Youngblood thing, and I don't know what it was. It's a very cool picture, though.
I think you might have shared that on Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I recall that.
Let's stay with this mid 90s kind of turmoil. Rob leaves Image, or maybe Image kicks Rob out. Top Cow leaves Image for a little bit. What's going on, like behind the scenes? Are you guys worried the ship's sinking? Are you trying to keep people on board or kick people out? Like what is that? That must have been an exciting time.
It was a very difficult time. It was very difficult for me. One of the things we put in the bylaws was that no partner could be removed unless he had done something so egregious that it affected the body politic. And so tempers wouldn't flare. I know it's impossible to believe that some of us actually have tempers, but so tempers wouldn't flare. The idea was it had to be a unanimous vote to vote someone out. Except, of course, for the person that was getting voted out. And then there had to be a cooling off period for 2 weeks. And then the second vote taken. So, while I don't want to get into it, there were a whole lot of things that had happened with Rob at that time. And I think he even admits now that, he went way over, way beyond the pale. Mark quit as a result of all of this. And so we had the first vote. And just before we had the second vote, Rob faxed over his resignation. So in a way, both are right. The second vote didn't happen because it didn't need to happen. Actually, it did happen. Our lawyer advised us against it. Said, no, you can't do that now. I'm like, yeah, we're going to do it anyways. Image has had a really hard time following the standard rules, just, which I love personally, because I've always had a hard time following the rules. But so it was very difficult. It was very, for me, it was very heartbreaking. It was a really rotten time.
We had a big conversation with Steve Bissette, and 1963 is that's a hallmark comic for the people of our generation. And he sort of illustrated it like you brought Alan Moore into the mixture. 1963 is going down, and then the other founding fathers are like trying to get their little piece of Alan Moore now that he's doing superhero comics again or whatever. Is that how you saw it?
No, not really. I am not by nature a very competitive person. I just don't care. It's sort of like, so what? Jim had hired Alan, and I figured, I think it was Jim and Rob, the guys with the two big studios, and they had a lot of money. So I figured, I'll keep Alan in hash for a while. It was okay with me. I didn't really care. What bothered me was that they wanted Jim to take over the annual and pulled it away from me. That bothered me because it just seemed like a slap in the face, which I think it was. But that said, Alan and I have always gotten along very well, and Eric Stevenson and Alan have always gotten along very well. So, when Eric came back to work for me when I was publisher, he wanted to do the 63 annual. That was his uppermost on his mind. So I said, okay, well, let's give Alan a call and see what he says. So, and also, during that time, to put a finer point on it, Rob said that he wanted to revamp Supreme, and would I call up Alan and ask him to take over Supreme? Okay. He goes, but I don't want any of that 1963 shit. And I was like, Rob, if you're going to ask him to take over Supreme, you're going to take whatever he gives you. Okay? And Alan was in this sort of nostalgic binge after 1963, which he later brought to America's Best Comics, right? So I figured out that, and Dave Gibbons told me once that this was the absolute perfect thing to say to Alan. So I call up Alan. Eric Stevenson is there with me. That's why it came to mind. And I figured the best thing I could say to Alan, we want you to take over writing Supreme. He goes, I don't know. I go, Alan, I'm going to think about it for a couple of days. I'm going to give you a call back in a couple of days, but think about this. We want you to do everything with Supreme that DC wouldn't let you do with Superman. That was it. That's what got him on board. So anyways, when Eric comes back to the company, back to the fold, we call up Alan. I said, Alan, you're on speakerphone because I got Eric Stevenson here. And Alan goes, oh, Eric, nice to see you with a reputable Image partner.
Wow.
Yeah.
Man.
But where's that annual?
We're gonna have to make a bootleg of that.
Yes.
Yeah, the problem is that, there's so much. I mean, Rob doesn't have Youngblood anymore. DC has Wildcats. Steve and Alan don't talk anymore. They've split up the characters. I mean, it's just what I do have about 19 pages of layouts from Alan on the annual.
Yo, that's dope.
Yeah. We don't believe you. You're going to have to show them to us. Prove it.
No one gets to see those.
You mentioned Jim and Wildstorm in DC. That's another question I always have is what was that experience like whenever you hear that Jim Lee's selling Wildstorm to DC Comics? That must have been an Image meeting, right?
No, actually what happened was there'd been some rumblings, about Jim. you know. And what happened was, I think Jim did the honorable thing, which, you know, for Jim is quite typical. He called all of us up individually and told us about it. And, you know, we were all like, I mean, it's that whole non-interference thing, you know. You can't be a little pregnant. You can't be a little free, you know. You're either free or you're not, you know. And I always saw Image as artistic emancipation. That was my whole deal, you know. You can come and do a book with Image, and that's great, you know. But if your desire is to go somewhere else and to do something else, I support you as a creator, and you go and do that. And Jim, just what he told me was that he was just tired of being the CEO. He was just tired of running everything, and he just needed a break from it. So, okay.
I always wondered, and I have no connection to this, but in my mind, I always wondered if it was a move to keep his staff together whenever, you know, comics were in sort of this downturn, and if it was almost a way to keep from having to downsize or to, you know, let people go.
I think it was part of that. I think that played a bit into it. You know, it wouldn't surprise me that it didn't. I don't know what his financial situation was at that time, but he had this huge office with tons of people in La Jolla. Now, I don't know if you guys know California or not. La Jolla's like Beverly Hills on the coast. Okay, that's, you know, I mean, everyone has this idea of Beverly Hills and mansions and all that kind of shit. Okay, La Jolla's just north of San Diego, and it's beachfront property. Okay, so, you know, it wasn't like they were, you know, working out of a garage somewhere or a basement. I mean, they were in expensive property.
Exponential growth, like going through history, you hear them like, yeah, we have like a 1,000 square foot office, 3,000 square foot, then like 10,000 square foot. It became exponential at a certain point.
It's interesting to hear, you know, Jim Lee being tired of that CEO position. You know, we've done a lot of coverage on Kevin Eastman, Peter Laird, the Turtles, and it's, from the outside, it's such a dream, right? The Turtles is the ultimate cartoonist dream, that success. But as we get to talk to people around them, they become so busy they don't get to make comics. You know, just managing that property, that what we all perceive as the dream means they don't get to do the comics.
Yeah, plus other things factor into it. Everybody's got their hand out, you know. I've had this, and it's funny, I just had it this morning with Eric Stevenson over a whole different thing, but I've had this conversation with Joe Quesada and with Paul Levitz and with Mike Richardson, and it's like, when you're in charge, the people that you say yes to, the people that you can help, think you're great. The people that you don't say yes to think you're a prick. And then there's the people that work for you because you're the boss and you got to keep things running. It's a lot of pressure. And then you've got family pressure on top of that. People from the family wanting a job, wanting money, wanting this, wanting that. Everybody wants a piece of you. And when Image burst the way it burst, everybody wanted a piece of all of us. And it was tiring. It was really tiring. Todd and Jim still go through that to this day, you know. But Todd's got a very relaxed attitude, and Jim's just, you know, just kind of flows with it. But it was tough. It was really tough. Everybody wants a piece of you. And that's something you never expect, you know. It's just, you know.
I often think about that from my own perspective because I have a very, I don't know, modest career, I guess I would say, but it becomes overwhelming at times with requests, with emails, with just keeping up with everything. And I often think, like, if you were twice as successful or if you were 10 times as successful, how on earth would you manage this? You know, you talk about exponential growth, Ed, and it can be applied to everything. Yeah. You know, it can be applied to those requests people are asking of you.
And now in the, like, an internet space where we have this infrastructure set up where it is very easy to be very, very popular and have no money. So you can't
Right.
afford an assistant or anything like that, but you're getting that deluge of emails
Sure.
and phone calls, and it could, I mean, it creates anxiety. I'm sitting here looking at my phone fucking blowing up because there's a million calls coming in.
So the next stop that I would like to talk about is your role as publisher at Image. I think you sign on for that around 1999.
Right.
Can you talk about some of the highlights and challenges that you faced?
Larry Martyr never wanted to be publisher. From the first time he interviewed with us, he said, I don't want to be publisher. Larry is a wartime concierge, and that's what he does. And that's what he does best. So I remember sitting in his office and saying, well, I don't want to be publisher. What should my title be? And I said, well, you're directing the executives, so you're the executive director. Yeah, okay. We found out later that that's an office used, I think, exclusively for people in nonprofits. But we didn't know at the time. It just sounded good. At any rate, as things turned out towards the end there, Larry was forced into the role of being publisher. And Larry has a kind of screw it attitude, which is great because he's very calm, and you could always go to Larry for good advice, and that was wonderful. Didn't serve him well as a publisher. And Image at the time had all kinds of small studio logos on the cover, and there were a whole bunch of, I thought, amateurish books, a whole bunch of titillation books, swimsuit issues in December, all that kind of stuff. Look, guys, girls got tits. It's like, wow, who'd have thunk it? And that's what they were publishing, because he was publishing to make the monthly nut. Okay, what would it take to keep the office open and the people who were running the office employed? And that's what he was thinking. That was his line of thinking. So when I came in, they held a meeting, and Mark said that he was sick and tired of these non-entities riding the old whore into town. And he wanted to get rid of all the studio things, icons, whatever. And I said, I want to get rid of all the titillation books. The reason we can't get good people here is because we have so many shitty books coming out of this that we can do better than this. So my attitude was to burn it to the ground, just scorched earth. Let's restart everything. Keep the books that are good, keep the books that are that show some promise, and do our damnedest to get some people into the company. Because of the way my head works, that to me was a lot of books that were non-genre specific and that were a little bit on the edge, if you will. So there were a couple of years, the first couple of years there, where things were really tight, because I did this. But my attitude was we had to do this in order to rebuild the company. And in a lot of ways that worked. I think ultimately it did work, because Eric Stevenson, who had come in, continued that path. And because he continued in that direction, we started getting better and better people. And as we got better and better people, we were able to experiment a lot more. I think one of the things that always pissed me off about Marvel and DC was that they stayed within a very small framework, even though they had enough money to do some experimenting. And I don't mean Marvel doing sword and sorcery books or that kind of thing. Conan is a superhero without a cape. It's just, there's no difference, in my opinion. So that's what it was like. And it was tough rebuilding. It was, I had tons of people yelling and screaming at me because I was canceling their books. But the book's making money. I don't care. I just don't care. So,
how hands-on were Todd and Eric, like the other partners, whenever you were doing this? Were you sort of, I don't know, pitch them your vision and then you were free to go execute this?
They let me have my way. I mean, with it for a while. I mean, Image partners never really interfere with Image Central Office. We still don't. We don't involve ourselves usually. As long as things are going okay, there's no reason for us to involve ourselves. If you trust the person running the office, things did not self-correct quickly enough, and there were a few other problems that we won't go into. So they decided to correct things, and that's when Eric Larson took over. Eric stayed for a while, and then Eric Stevenson took over. And Eric's been, I don't know how many years now he's been doing it. But
some of the highlights I remember from like your tenure, I think you brought Bendis in, right?
Yes.
That was always really cool because Bendis coming out of Cleveland, we would see him, we're both in Pittsburgh, and we would see him like, as a hardworking professional. Like he would show up at the Pittsburgh Comic Con and was very generous with his time and talking shop and craft but also selling, like he was a guy that was out there selling those books. So whenever he joined Image, I remember us being like, oh, that's awesome. This guy's great.
I first published Brian during the non-line. I published Fire and Torso, and also I had a relationship with Brian. So when he came back, and with Mike Oman, so when he came back to Image, it was, I think, just before he started at Marvel, somewhere around the same vicinity. So he and Mike did Powers,
right,
which I thought was a cool book. It's like, it was pitched at me as Homicide, but with superheroes. Okay, all right, that's interesting. That's different. What I'm trying to think. Noble Causes was Jay Farber. Mm-hmm. And that was pitched at me as, what if the Kennedys had superpowers? Okay, I like that. It's cool. It's different. I hadn't heard it before. So like I said, it was easy and it still is. It's easy to sell me a book on an idea. Just give me an idea and make it so I want to read that book. Did
you also start to venture into the book market?
Yes.
That seems like a great move. I mean, in hindsight, it's the direction the whole industry has gone, and that was pretty early on. Yeah,
book market and libraries both. So I attended the ALA and I attended the ABA. Matter of fact, I was at the ABA one year. I don't remember. It was the year that Todd and it was just before Todd and Neil were suing each other. And Neil comes up to the booth and we hugged each other, and there was some woman standing there, and she goes, "I thought you guys were suing each other." And we both turned to her and both said simultaneously, "It's not personal." So yeah, I tried to open up those markets because what I saw was revenue streams. And the way I explained it to the guys was, if the pieces of the pie are getting smaller, we got to find more pieces. And these revenue streams will do it. I also tried to talk them into going digital, but none of them were quite there yet. It took a couple of years, but I said, this is the future. We need to get ahead of this because this is the future. This is where things are going. But that didn't go over with them. It was too soon.
Would you consider yourself, are you retired now, or when was the last time you put pencil to paper?
I'm semi-retired. I have an idea for a graphic novel, but I stopped about 12 pages into it.
Hey, man, we're on quarantine, man. This thing has to see the light of day now that you just even hinted at that?
Yeah, it's just really hard for me to get back to it. For the last several years, I published. I do publishing through Shadowhawk. And again, it's about things that interest me, stories and ideas that interest me. And the only time I've really drawn is I draw covers for the Hero Initiative. So those covers are given, charity, and that's about it. I just kind of lost that impetus that I have. It was so strong in the early days. When I worked at Marvel, I basically wrote and drew 2 books a month. You can't write and draw 2 books a month unless you're doing it 16 hours plus a day. And I think it just wore me out. So at least that's my excuse. So there you go. But I will tell you one thing about my time early on at when I was publisher at Image. One of the things, besides giving the green light to Walking Dead, even though Robert will love to tell you that I turned it down 3 times or 2 times or whatever.
That's the lore.
Yeah, well, it's true. But the reason I turned it down was because it was first pitched to me as Dawn of the Dead or Day of the Dead or something like that. I said, Robert, no, you can't do that. That's already been done. That's not a good idea. So then he came back with Planet of the Zombies. Oh, God. I'm like, okay, Robert, what's the hook? What's the hook here? And he didn't know what I was talking about. So he called up Stevenson and goes, what does he mean? And Eric's like, give him a hook. Give him something to grab onto. So, and I was telling Robert, look, zombie books don't sell. They've never sold, which is true. So then he comes back with, okay, the zombie apocalypse it's alien invaders. I was like, oh God, that's horrible. But I'd never heard of that before, So I said, okay, 5 issues, in and out, so it doesn't cost us too much money. Go ahead. And this is after Robert did not have a good track record at the time, Had he told me that the story is about a father and a son fighting against all odds, I would have said yes immediately. It's like, okay, that's a story I can relate to, okay? But alien zombies and all this other crap that he had pitched, was like, oh God, dude, really? But one of the things that was very cool about that time was Free Comic Book Day. I was on the steering committee for the first Free Comic Book Day. So there were a bunch of people from Diamond. We had a meeting at the con, and there was Bob Wayne from DC and Mike Martins from Dark Horse, and Casada came in late, sat down next to me. And everybody was on and on about, okay, we're going to do this, but nobody knew exactly when to do it. So there's like a 7 billion pound elephant sitting on the table. And I said, well, guys, it's a big movie coming from Marvel next year called Spider-Man. Don't you think we should target the movie? And second I said that, Joe hit me on the leg and goes, thanks, man. And, I think Bob Wayne's sphincter tightened, and all the guys from Diamond were like, God. And I said, come on, if it was a DC movie or an Archie movie or whatever, that we're either going to work together and do this or we're not. So, you guys decide. It just makes sense. That was it. So I'm the one who picked, and it's done that every single year since.
I love Free Comic Book Day. It's to me, it's one of the greatest things the comics industry has done in my lifetime. Like creating essentially a Black Friday. Every other business in America would be envious of an industry that actually did that and made it work. It's such a remarkable achievement.
Well, you know where it came from. Baskin Robbins had a free scoop of ice cream day, and Joe Field, who came up with the idea, his store was a few doors down from Baskin Robbins, and he saw the lines around the block for this free scoop day. And he realized, he talked to the manager, and the manager goes, yeah, well, we give away a little tiny scoop of ice cream, and then they buy 14 cones.
Right.
You know, it's our biggest day. And that was, you know, that's, I've heard a lot of retailers bitch and complain about the fact that they have to pay for the books. I'm like, okay, so you pay for these books. You get to choose which books you want in your store, because you know your store better than anybody. You have to pay for them, and you have to give them away free. But you have all that traffic coming into your store. And like a lot of things, comics is very, very much an impulse buy, you know? So these people who haven't read a comic maybe in years, you know, come in with their kids or come in by themselves, and they see this cool stuff and they want to pick it up. And stores, most stores, not all, but most stores have their best day of the year, or one of their best days of the year, which is cool. So it accomplishes a lot. Now, I don't know how much repeat business they get from it, you know, from citizens, from people who don't do comics. You know, I hope some, I hope a lot, but the fact that they get a good day out of it, that's enough for me.
Yeah, I would think so.
I don't think I've ever talked to a store owner who said otherwise about it not being their best day or whatever.
I do remember the early days, though, the first couple years, and it was such a weird concept. I do remember a lot of stores kind of wrestling with it in the beginning, but yeah, I mean, now every store I know, it's their biggest day of the year.
Well, that was part of the thing when we formed Image. A lot of the stores were really nervous because they didn't know how a new company would do. One guy said to me, I know how a Todd McFarlane Spider-Man sells, but I don't know how a Todd McFarlane Spawn is going to sell. And my response was, well, first, you haven't had a Todd McFarlane Spider-Man in over 6 months, 6 to 9 months. Second, it's Todd McFarlane. Shut up. It's like, so...
The sort of mental math that you guys did yourselves, you know, like we've seen that illustrated in some of the documentaries and stuff, like where Silvestri's like, okay, like I just need to sell 60,000 to make what I make with X-Men royalties when I sell, you know, 700,000, you know, like, so not certainly in that speculation market, man, not too big of a stretch to imagine that you could hit your 60,000 number.
Yeah, that was a big part of it. You know, I mean, you know, I still get royalty checks from Marvel for, you know, $20. You know, it's like, okay, well, you know, it's manna from heaven. All right, you know, who cares? But, you know, yeah. Whereas with a book, the way we structured thing, if you have a book that's successful and that becomes evergreen, you can make a lot more than $20. The potential is there.
Compare it to any other medium, there's sort of no better deal if you have a successful thing, you know, like if you're not reliant on just making that advance and not worrying about paying that advance back or whatever.
Yeah, which a lot of people, I mean, you know, some guy just sent me a private message on Facebook wanting to know if he should sign this deal where he's virtually signing away everything for nothing. And I said, well, you already know this is a bad deal. Why do it? You know, get an attorney to look at their contract. Don't do this on your own. Get someone who knows what this language means, and he's going to tell you. And don't fall for, I can't believe people do this, but you can have the copyright and we'll take the trademark. No.
I've never heard that.
Oh yeah. I don't know how many conventions I've gone to where I've explained the difference between the two and what they both mean, you know, in the simplest terms humanly possible, because a lot of people don't know, you know.
It's super instructive as well. Just the part that you said about Kirkman and having like a very cogent, you know, 2-3 sentence elevator pitch to explain your thing to like hook people in, you know, like
right.
That's so valuable. You know, you have such limited time with people at conventions, like and get in, get out.
Yeah, it's actually really well, and a lot of people they don't understand the difference between plot and story. So when you ask them what their story is, they start giving you the plot. Well, and then they go here, and then they get a horse, and then the horse turns into a junkie, and then it's like, okay, that's the plot. I don't want to know the plot. What's the story? What's it about? What happens? Why should I be interested in this? Why should I invest myself in this? What's the story? Well, I don't know. Stan Lee used to say, if you can't explain your character in one sentence, you don't know your character. Well, that's not true. Really? Kid is bitten by a spider and gets powers and understands responsibility. We're in, we're out. That's the thing. Not the plot. That's the thing.
I like it. Anything else, Jimmy?
I am very satisfied.
Mr. Valentino, was a privilege.
Hey, thanks, guys. I enjoyed it.
Before we
my very first telething, like I'm in the Jetsons.
Before we split, is there any social media or websites that our viewers should know about? And we will also include the links directly below this video on YouTube.
No, I'm just on Facebook. I don't do Twitter or anything like that.
Does Shadowline have a website?
No, not anymore. Just on Facebook. Shadowline's on Facebook, and I'm on Facebook. But no, it's social media can eat up every single minute of your day if you let it. And I used to have this sign off when Image had its own message board. Remember message boards?
Yeah.
I don't have those anymore. But my sign off was any idiot can post on the internet. The problem is they all do. That to me is why I'm not on Twitter or anything like that. So
Smart man.
I have no time for these idiots. It's like, you want to be an idiot on your time. I'm going to sit over here and have fun.
Right.
So
I do have one last question before we wrap up. What is
Sure.
on the wall behind you, Jim? I see like these diplomas or plaques, or
One of them has Shadowline on it.
one has Normal Man, I think.
yeah, those are the trademark things for Normal Man, Shadowline, and Shadowhawk. And then above, I don't know if you can see those or not.
Oh, snap.
On the far right is a page from Guardians of the Galaxy. I don't remember which issue, but it's Talon and Yondu talking. And then a Shadowhawk cover from a Shadowhawk one-shot. This is a jam piece from Image's 10th anniversary, which became our 15th anniversary. So it's Todd, Mark, me, and Eric, and Todd inked Mark and I, and noodled Eric, much to his chagrin. And then a page from A Touch of Silver, which is my favorite book that I've ever done. And then a page from Normal Man that has Normal Man and Captain Everything running into Mon Man. And they say something to Mon Man about his book getting all these awards. And Mon Man says, yeah, but it don't sell, man. and, which is kind of typical. And at the end, and Normal Man is not enjoying the convention, and so Mon Man, whose superpower is Ganja breath, lets out a hit on Normal Man, and Normal Man goes, "Best superpower ever! Bet your ass, Mon."
That illustrates the Jim Valentino career perfectly, man. Like straddling the undergrounds and the mainstream landscapes.
Yeah, what can you do?
Once again, Mr. Valentino, it was a pleasure. Thank you very much for taking the time to sit with us and chat and talk about the good old days.
Yep. Thank you, guys.